Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to your daily sit rep for Monday, the 15th of December, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. With that, good morning, Robert. We have a lot to get through today. Let's go ahead and start off inside the Beltway. This is coming out from the Director of National Intelligence. 2,000 Afghan nationals with terror ties in the United States. What's the latest?
Good morning, Mike. This was an interview with Tulsi Gabbard over the weekend, and she said that at least 2,000 Afghan nationals with ties to or are known or suspected terrorists entered the United States during the Biden administration. An DNI official said that these 2,000 Afghan nationals were identified based on intelligence from the National Counterterrorism Center.
Mm-hmm. All right. And this is, so there's 2,000 Afghans. If I recall correctly, probably 6 months ago or so, Robert, maybe longer, you stated that DHS said there's 1.7 million special interest aliens that came into the United States. So these could be terror ties, it could be espionage ties. The special interest aliens are effectively either legal or illegal immigrants coming into this country, or visa holders, or anyone trying to get access to this country. 1.7 million of them with some kind of nexus to national security. Have you seen any updates on that from DNI, DHS, anyone since that number first came out?
I have not, other than this, and then this 2,000 is part of. I think they said there's a total of 18,000 Afghan nationals that came in during that time, and this is part of that group. I haven't seen any updates on the other special interest aliens.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so over 10% then of all Afghan immigrants who came in during Biden have terror ties. 10% of all of them that we know of. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. Let's go ahead and move on here, and I'll just let you take it on from what's going on in the House.
So the House is considering a bill called the Power Plant Reliability Act of 2025. The idea behind this bill is expanding the authority of the Federal Electricity Reliability Corporation to delay these power plant retirements that utilities have been warning about for the last few years. It would give them the authority to delay those power plant retirements for up to 10 years, and also give them the authority to require state energy officials, these regional transmission organizations, and public utilities to develop long-term plans for building up a lot of this power transmission infrastructure that's required to stave off some of these power shortages that officials and both state and federal level officials have been warning about. Moving over to the domestic side, the Trump administration announced that charges against a 26-year-old man from Tulsa, Oklahoma, for making threats against ICE agents on social media. This man was charged with threatening to assault or murder federal law enforcement officers. And this is the latest in a series of announced crackdowns on people making threats on social media against ICE and CBP. So to me, this looks like the Trump administration is starting to actually enforce and take some of these threats seriously, and going after people who are posting not just social media posts, but TikTok videos and other threats against ICE and CBP agents.
Mm-hmm. Well, one reason why I think federal law enforcement has to do this is making threats is not only illegal. Robert, the problem that I see is when you get on TikTok or you get on Instagram or, whatever social media platform you are, and every 10th post, every 5th or 10th or 20th post on the topic of ICE is these people are Gestapo, they're Nazi, they have to be stopped, they have to be what X, Y, or Z, whatever kind of latent or credible threat of violence there is, that message gets normalized. And once ICE is bad has been normalized, obviously, in certain channels. The problem is when you take one step beyond that and say, by any means necessary, ICE has to be stopped. These individual ICE agents have to be stopped by any means necessary, including violence. If that message gets normalized, then violence is way more likely to proliferate. So we have seen in the past where when people start getting rolled up, when they start getting arrested for things like this, that tends to be a deterrent for future activity, future rhetoric. Do you see this having any effect at all?
Yeah, I think this is. So I think that you're right that this is a necessary move by the Trump administration to stop that, because so one of the things about these viral moments, that we've seen over the last year or so, that includes like local Democratic officials getting arrested while effectively interfering with immigration enforcement, or like these de-arrest attempts that are put out on video, published on social media. The idea is to put it into the heads of normal people who aren't politically activated yet, that they can do this, they can get away with it. Allowing these threats to continue on social media also does that, and it's like it basically multiplies the amount of people who will be out in public and see an enforcement operation and say, oh, I can just nobody got arrested for making threats, nobody got arrested for interfering or making de-arrest attempts, so I can do that too. And it's like a mimetic operational capacity building, basically.
Yeah, 100%. And generic Cyril, whoever this guy is, says social media is social engineering, and this is such a crucial point. Whenever we talk about power, especially building any kind of political or social power, a lot of this comes down to conditioning beliefs. There are only a number of ways that power is built, and conditioning a belief in someone or in a group of people through repetition, especially on social media. If a 15, 20-year-old, 30-year-old American gets on social media and 10 to 20% of all the posts they consume is the same belief being perpetuated, maybe not even by domestic actors, maybe by foreign actors, it conditions that belief in people. And once you have that belief conditioned, it's almost like mob mentality. At any rate, very great point though on social media. Let's go ahead and move on here to the global sit rep. All right, Jared, lots of news here. Just one thing. Well, let's go ahead and start with Gustavo Petro in Colombia. Go ahead.
So this is the Colombian president, Petro. He warned Venezuela that it cannot depend on military mobilization if it is attacked, and it must have a democratic revolution, Petro's words. Now, Petro's also calling for a general amnesty and a transitional government to achieve this. So he's not calling for a violent revolution, but simply a political revolution here.
So he is calling for Maduro to step down and be replaced.
Yes.
Okay. Well, this is very significant.
Willingly do so.
Yeah, this is very significant because a month, 2 months ago, he was talking up this economic unity state with Venezuela, and he was publicly backing Maduro. And I don't know if it's some carrot. I don't know if it's the carrot or the stick from the United States, but Gustavo Petro has changed his tune for sure.
Yes. He does still talk about Gran Colombia and the Bolivarian project, so I think that may still be something he intends to have, and we'll see what he means by a transitional government with that. And then just down in Peru's Congress authorized the U.S. military to have personnel enter and stay in Peru to train the Peruvian armed forces and national police. And the U.S. forces will be authorized to carry and use weapons inside of Peru. And they will come from, quoting here, members of special forces, of the Navy SEAL team, and of civilian affairs and military information support. So it sounds a lot like counterterrorism, if you ask me.
Yeah, for internal defense. And listen, Peru is no stranger. I don't even know if Shining Path is still around. But just like Colombia, they're no stranger to having these domestic terrorist groups either. But this is very significant because Peru is in this whole region. And by the way, if anyone has noticed, we've been talking a lot about South America, and all of this ties back into this this concept of Fortress North America and then hardening the Western Hemisphere. So South America is obviously not included in North America, but the goal from the Trump administration and an idea or concept cheerleaded by a great many people surrounding the administration is you have to harden the Western Hemisphere. And I saw this map floating around X over the weekend, and it's drawn in like Microsoft Paint. It's a very rudimentary global map, but it has the Western Hemisphere and it says me, and they say, oh, this is Trump's vision for the world. All right, Western Hemisphere, and it says me, as in Trump. And then it has Europe and Northern Asia, including Russia, as Putin. And then it has basically half of Africa and everything east of there as belonging to Xi. And, it's funny that this map started going around about the same time that I saw this idea pop up in like Politico and a couple other places online. So this is obviously being, I think it's somewhat real, but basically you have these people that say Trump has promised Chinese President Xi Jinping his sphere of influence. Trump has promised Putin his sphere of influence. And then the United States basically gets to keep the Western Hemisphere, including South America, as its sphere of influence. And this is Trump's plan to avoid World War III. That's the concept, just generally. some background knowledge. All right, Jared, please continue.
Yeah. Over in
Let's move down to Chile because
yes.
yeah. So this Antonio Cast, he's a right wing guy. I think when he started off, he was in a really crowded field of conservative presidential candidates. At any rate, he was elected on Sunday, which is extremely important. I was actually talking to a friend of mine that I met in Chile last night, and we were talking about this election. I said, "Look, does he have it? Is there any hope whatsoever for Chile?" And you have to understand, Chile's had its ever since, what was it, 1972 or somewhere around there. You had that military coup with Pinochet, and then Chile becomes democratic again. And it's not very long, and they're back to electing socialist presidents. Michelle Bachelet, when I was down there, she was the president. She's a member of the Socialist Party. You have Santiago, which is the capital of Chile, had a mayor literally from the Chilean Communist Party. Just to give you an idea of where the electorate has gone post Pinochet. But he told me last night that Cast, who's the right-wing presidential candidate, even won in Santiago. So Santiago, you have that region. So you have them previously supporting a socialist president, supporting a communist mayor, and now they've gone for the right-wing president. I think that's very interesting. And he said, yeah, Chile has a chance. All right, Jared, anything to add there?
Yes. In the U.S.'s congratulatory message from the State Department, they said, we expect you to help with illegal immigration. So right off the bat, setting the stage for you will start taking deportations. You're going to cut migration down, which, if I remember right, Cast was also running on doing that internally anyway. So it looks like there is going to be quite a bit of turnabout here. And
Yes.
Chile is, I don't remember if it's number 1 or number 2 copper producer, which will help significantly for trying to reindustrialize.
I'm pretty sure they're number 1. That whole Atacama, they have lithium, they've got copper, I mean, silver, they have tons of this stuff in Chile.
Yes, absolutely. So if he's going to mirror what we've been saying about kicking China out, really taking the national security strategy to heart, I think we could see quite a revival down in South America in right-wing politics. And speaking of China, Chinese...
And just real quick, let's talk about this map here. So you've got Bukele in El Salvador, you have Milei in Argentina, you've got Cast now in Chile, you have what, Bolivia? There's a couple other countries that
Rodrigo Paz, and he is potentially switching over mining contracts from China and Russia over to the United States. It's being talked about, but nothing's firm yet. Once it is firm, I'll let you know. And then there's obviously, you mentioned Milei. Peru is big. Peru just switched over after impeaching their former leftist president. And one other major thing for Peru is China just set up that megaport. It cuts down a lot on their logistics. He'll probably look toward the United States to follow the hoarders here. And it's all of these people are also routine. Every time one of these takes power, Venezuela puts out a piece from their state media saying, we don't like this, with considerably more, flared words. But yes, all of this appears to be attacking a support structure that Venezuela has in South America amongst a leftist coalition.
Colombia has presidential election coming up in May as well. So basically there's been this Azul wave, and South America has gone through, over the past several decades, have gone through this, go from socialist back to right-wing conservative, back and forth. And this is very important, because if the United States, actually, you know what, let's just go ahead and talk about this. So German Chancellor Merz said over the weekend that Pax Americana is over. He said, the American leadership of the world is over, and Europe has to step up, and we have to lead Europe. And this is important for a couple of reasons. Number one, because we actually kind of talked about this last week, where allegedly the White House has given these European NATO countries until 2027 to be able to take over their continental defense, the defense of the European continent. And according to these reports, which were sourced anonymously, but I have no reason to doubt them, the Trump administration is basically telling NATO, take over continental defense by 2027, or we're going to stop supporting NATO in some ways. And one of those ways is stop doing military exercises with them. These European NATO countries currently, they have a projection. They say, we want to take over continental defense by 2030. 2030 is too late. So the Trump administration, again, I don't think this has been on the record, but allegedly, and I have no reason to doubt them, 2027 is the year in which they need to do that. And so now you have Mertz coming out saying Pax Americana is over. And I've seen a lot of people, especially on X, jump on this idea that Pax Americana is over. And I say, as a global empire or a global imperial or military presence, yes, I do agree with that. But America's not going to zero. I think what we're seeing here, and we've seen for years now, this is obviously nothing new, but the picture is becoming a little more clear. Just like the dollar may eventually has to stop being a global currency, global reserve currency, we will also see the American military stop being deployed in the global footprint that we've been used to our entire lives. And instead, we are going to call it a retreat, call it a retrograde, whatever, to the Western Hemisphere. And so I look at these right-wing presidents happening in South America, and I think that's part of a bigger strategy. And I'm not sure it's the level to which the United States has supported, other than endorsing. We have seen the Trump administration endorsing certain presidential candidates in South America. Was Honduras also? Yeah. Honduras has pending. They're going through this whole big thing. Honduras basically said in their presidential election, Honduras said something like 14% of the votes had irregularities. And right as of last week, I just checked it on Friday. I haven't checked this morning yet, but Honduras does have allegedly a pending victory for a conservative president down there. So at any rate, this is part of a much larger shift. And I obviously will not say this Azul wave in South America is going to be permanent, but if you're trying to kick China out of South America, this bodes much better for the United States than it does for China. All right, Jared, on that, let's continue.
Well, one thing with Honduras is potentially going to be the first political loss for China since I think it was in the 1990s. The leading candidate is talking about switching recognition back to Taiwan, which they just switched in 2023. That would probably be a significant domino toward getting everybody else to switch back over. Because remember, it was Latin America that was one of the last sets to fall. There are a couple Pacific islands. That would be huge for China's international reputation. Mm-hmm. Speaking of China.
Sorry, one other thing. X-Runner brings up a great point. He said it's called right sizing. And I agree. I think Pax Americana is being right sized to our resources in manpower and capability. So I think that's an excellent point. Pax Americana is not going away. The dollar is not going away. It's just we're going to have a much smaller footprint. And it seems to be, even the dollar's use, I think we talked about this on Friday as well. There's a question about hyperinflation, whether the dollar was going to hyperinflate. Yeah, maybe I think there's like a decent chance that it could. It's really dependent on what the Fed does, how many dollars the Fed creates. However, once the dollar loses its world reserve status, it's not like the dollar is going to zero either. We're going to start exporting the dollar in the Western Hemisphere, and it's going to be like a hemispheric reserve rather than a global reserve. And a lot of things are going to change. The value of the dollar is obviously going to be severely devalued over time. It has to be. But, I would just say there's just a lot of like doom pushing and doom peddling about Pax Americana and the dollar. And it's going to change shape. It's no longer going to be global, but it's not going away entirely. It's going to be here in the Western Hemisphere. All right. With that, Jared, finally, please continue.
All right. So China convicted Jimmy Lai over the weekend. It was for conspiracy and sedition, but specifically the judge called out conspiring with the United States to depose the Chinese Communist Party. Normally when I see China actually making a public statement on this, they will say certain countries. They will never name the country. I think this is a significant indicator that China is going to shift back into like the wolf warrior diplomacy that we saw in 2018, and they're going to be much more aggressive in the coming year. And on that note, China's Coast Guard just late last week attacked 20 Filipino fishing boats. Now, this is abnormal because normally they will interact with like the Filipino government, even the civilian side or the military there, not the fishermen. They may try to drive them off. But here they boarded them, cut their anchors, and also started shooting them with water cannons, which is potentially lethal. We previously talked about less lethal. That's probably where that would fall in that line. The Filipino Coast Guard did stop the attack, and that's leading Filipino lawmakers to call for regular Coast Guard escorts for fishermen, meaning increased presence, increased likelihood of a confrontation here. All things to keep track of, which I will be doing. And then lastly, the U.S. reaffirmed its commitment to extended nuclear deterrence for South Korea during their latest meeting last week. Now, the reason this stands out to me is that Korea has repeatedly, under this administration, expressed worries about will we get the deterrence, despite the fact that every single time they get the reassurance. That, to me, along with their upcoming transfer of uranium enrichment technology from the United States and recent talks that were published by the Korean government saying we should consider developing our own nuclear weapons, indicates I think they're going to start developing nuclear weapons on their own in the near future. I don't know if they will wait until they are totally unsure of an American deterrence, or if they will just do it in secret. Frankly, I don't know. But I also worry that the perception of the inevitability of a nuclear deterrence failure may kick off an arms race anyway inside of Asia, where you see Korea, potentially Japan. I don't think the Philippines would do it only due to technological limitations, but that doesn't mean they don't have a desire to obtain them.
All right. Lots going on. Thanks for staying on top of that, Jared. All right, moving on. We got 49 protests today, which is about in the baseline. As a reminder, go out to these protests and just observe. All right, throughout the week, you're not going to see a lot of people at these protests. Maybe in the big cities, but definitely on the weekends. I don't think there's any significant national mass mobilization protests like National Days of Action coming up until March. That may change, but right now everyone should be getting ready for March, basically. All right, let's move on. The old spring offensive. Let's move on to the early warning section here. All right, Robert and Jared, speaking of the end of Pax Americana, there's still the United States is not going away. Its global military presence will no longer be global, but we will still be in a lot of places to protect our critical supply chains. That's going to leave a lot of foreign countries on the hook for securing their own sea lanes. I don't think we're going to be able to do it anymore. And over the weekend, this latest news broke about Pax Silica, which is this economic alliance or supply chain alliance for artificial intelligence, like semiconductors, critical minerals, and advanced technologies, and basically have a bunch of these countries coming together and saying, we are all going to work together to secure our supply chain, to continue our advancement of technology, and essentially not allow China to run the tables and have a majority share in these critical supply chains. Yeah, so whoever has the details, go ahead, please.
Oh, yeah, so there was also, they released a list of the countries that are involved in this. So the core members are Japan, South Korea, Singapore, the Netherlands, UK, Israel, the UAE, and Australia, and obviously the United States. But the guest contributors, these are people who are going to be providing expertise on these supply chain issues, include Taiwan, Canada, the EU, and the OECD. That's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. I did see, I think it was last week, there was some talk from Palantir was trying to organize something similar to this, and this might be, at least in part, the result of that. I think Palantir was hosting basically a conference with a bunch of political leaders and economic leaders from foreign countries with the idea of building up this wall against China, because China has, especially when you're talking rare earth metals and advanced technologies, they have cornered. Their deliberate strategy has been to corner the market on the production of those, or the refining of rare earth minerals, refining of fuels, even. And I think this is kind of what it looked like the Trump administration was trying to do with the tariffs. The idea of building a wall around China to get both their neighbors and our allies to take collective action to kind of try to walk back some of that dominance of the market on these key technologies and inputs that China has developed over the last 30 years.
Mm-hmm. Jared, anything, a lot of this stuff is crucial to U.S. defense supply chains and U.S. defense production. How do you see this affecting U.S. military readiness or our ability to produce what we need in the volume that we need it?
I think that it will take time to mature, but I think once it does mature, it will make a significant impact, because I'm looking at who they've got in here. Japan, South Korea makes sense. Singapore, you're looking at the Malacca Strait, and also one of the key allies in that region for numerous reasons. The Netherlands is a step into mainland Europe, but also Netherlands controls the lithography equipment for the highest end chips. They just went through a whole big ordeal with China last year about that. The UK, Israel and the UAE, you're looking at the Middle East, and then all of the contributors here, you're looking at the 4 closest members of the Five Eyes Alliance: the UK, Australia, the United States, and Canada are all participating. And that to me indicates this is looking at, okay, we need a total defense supply chain available. With the UAE particularly, that's controlling energy. Taiwan's obvious. This to me looks like they are preparing to secure a total global supply chain from start to finish. And Australia has already contributed significantly toward actually pulling the critical minerals out of the ground. They are working for investment into refining in order to get that. Frankly, this makes me bullish on it.
Yeah, certainly. So, go ahead, Robert. Briefly.
So I saw a question from the audience about it's from Bill J. After we start to shrink up on our influence, how long until we become an also played like UK, Spain? I think that this is a play against that, right? So when you're talking like historical global hegemonic powers, UK, Spain, Portugal, over the last like 400 years, they lost that hegemonic power because they lost one of their major sources of overseas center of gravity. For the UK, obviously they were hit hard by World War II, but one of the big factors in the dissolution of the empire was the anti-colonialist movement after the war and the loss of their colonial holdings. Post World War II, for the US, that's not necessarily direct colonial holdings. That's the US dollar reserve currency status. That is supply chains, basically. So I think this is a move to, if not prevent the dissolution of American global power, to at least soften the blow significantly. Going back to the national security strategy that was released last week, I think the Trump administration, the people who wrote it, Aldrich Colby, some of these other officials who contributed to it, they are trying to address a global environment, a rise of multipolarity. Basically, we're no longer the sole global power. We're going to have foreign adversaries that are going to be rising in prominence. And this is part of a deliberate strategy to prevent just a collapse of the American empire, so to speak.
Yeah, Robert, let's talk more about that later. The question that I wanted to ask is, Canada has a lot of natural resources. It seems that they are a natural signatory onto this Pax Silica alliance, but right now, what are they, a contributing guest or something like that, not an actual signatory? I saw a lot of Canadians on social media over the weekend say that the reason is because the Canadians don't like Trump, and that's the reason why they haven't officially signed on. Jared, have you seen anything one way or the other?
I have not. I have noticed that Canada seems to be shunned to the side. We need their access to the Arctic, but I mean, for even a long while, there was that talk of the 51st state. Yes, it's tongue in cheek. It's seriously, but not literally. But I do think that does indicate that Canada is going to be pushed to the side unless they actually start acting like an American ally, like what we're seeing out in LATAM and from Japan and Korea.
Mm-hmm. One other thing on this is two other things, actually. Chancellor Merz over in Germany also said that Germany needs to take leadership or something like that in NATO. Germany is plagued with electricity shortages. They have deindustrialized their country. There is no German leadership of the continent. In words, in rhetoric, maybe, but we're looking at a lot of these European countries. They just do not have the production base, the defense manufacturing capability to do this right now. Probably not in the next several years. There are just so many political hurdles that these countries have to overcome, like the Green Party. Some of these environmental regulations and the deindustrialization, the denuclearization. They do not have the juice. Canada's sitting in the exact same problem that many of these European countries are. And so at any rate, we'll leave it there for now. Let's go ahead and move on. I think we do have at least one or two other topics here. All right. On Meet the Press over the weekend, Senator Rand Paul was a guest, and he warned that partisan gerrymandering could be seen as justification for political violence. And I'll just tell you what he said. He did point out numerous times that this is not a Republican-only problem. He said, quote, both sides are doing it. He continues, I think that's going to lead to more civil tension and possibly more violence in our country. And he continues, but in general, when it becomes so extreme, like if California has no Republican representatives after this is done or has one left, I think that makes people so dissatisfied. They think, well, the electoral process isn't working anymore. Maybe we have to resort to other means. And he continues, quote, I think there's the potential that when people have no representation, that they feel disenfranchised and that it can lead, or it might lead to violence in our country. And I'll tell you this, kind of a bottom line up front. There's so many efforts by Republicans, not just Democrats, but by Republicans to stop gerrymandering in red states. And their argument is partisan gerrymandering is bad and red states shouldn't do it. If Republicans are successful in stopping red state gerrymandering, but not repealing or overturning blue state gerrymandering, all you do is you cement the conditions that will persist, which basically you have Democrats taking having an artificial overrepresentation through gerrymandering of blue states and lack of gerrymandering in red states. All that aside, I think Senator Paul's warning on political violence is historically warranted. Low intensity conflict. So that's conflict beneath the threshold of conventional war. So we're not talking about tanks and bombers. We're not talking about Russia, Ukraine, or World War II. But above routine peaceful competition, which is, you have elements of political warfare, but it is maybe political conflict, but it's not a routine type of conflict. That's what low intensity conflict is. So beneath conventional war, but above routine political competition. These types of conflicts are almost always grievance driven. And in this case, it is the loss of political representation. And that is a grievance that can lead to the delegitimization of the electoral process. As Paul says, you basically have some people say, well, voting is not working anymore, and so we have to solve this by other means. This is exactly what happened when the Irish Troubles started back in the 1960s. You have this majority Protestant area of Northern Ireland, and they gerrymandered away Catholic political representation. And Irish Catholics responded with civil rights marches, and they were ineffective. They also they were met with police violence. And then that's when you have the IRA starting to resort to political violence after that. I'm not saying that this is what's going to happen in the United States. I'm saying there's historically a case for this happening. And we could talk about Algeria and the French. We could talk about lots of other cases where people basically abandoned voting for political violence. So just to reiterate, efforts to block, well, Indiana's mid-decade redistricting failed thanks to Republicans. And I get the sentiment that no state should be gerrymandered. But when there's such an effort to block red state gerrymandering without repealing blue state gerrymandering, all you're doing is exacerbating the situation. And Robert, we were talking earlier before the show started. I know lots of people bring up Massachusetts and the Northeast states, but they're like almost 40%, 35, 40% in the 2024 election, 35 to 40% of Massachusetts residents voted for Trump. They have zero Republican representation in the House. And you have, was it New Hampshire is another crazy lopsided state?
Yeah, New Hampshire has a Republican governing trifecta. Both the chambers are majority Republican and the governor is Republican, and they have 2 Democratic House members and 0 Republicans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's nuts. How does that happen? All right. Well, thanks for that. Let's go ahead and so bottom line here on Paul is I think he's right. And if blue states and red states continue to go down that road, it will lock people out of representation. And I have not seen Democrats in the state of Texas do anything significant. But if there are basically taking away so many Democrat seats, I'm sure we're going to have protests. And just one other thing here. My concern would be if Republicans do keep the House and it's by a slim majority, maybe it's by a 1-seat majority or 3 to 5 like we have now, you will have Democrats come out and say, this is an illegitimate Congress. The only reason why there's a Republican House majority is because multiple states gerrymandered or the Supreme Court overturned Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And that's going to be, we'll say, problematic, and we'll leave it at that for now. All right, finally, let's talk about the Orders Project. These are JAG officers or former JAG officers, attorneys, trying to coach members of the military to disobey certain orders, Robert?
Well, some of them are former JAG lawyers, and they also said that this is going to include other private, non-military experienced private practice lawyers. And it's been launched by a nonprofit called the National Institute of Military Justice. Looking through the website, they say the idea is to connect military personnel with legal counsel that can give them advice on the legality of orders that they've received that they think might be unlawful orders. They also published a source book earlier this year for non-military lawyers to do the same thing, specifically lawyers outside of the National Institute of Military Justice or this Orders Project. I think the likely intent here is the same as some of these similar projects we've seen pop up since January. There's another group that claims to be former JAG lawyers that have done public releases on unlawful orders, immigration enforcement, and there was also that illegal orders video. I think the idea here is to tie up the Trump administration with military, like pushing military personnel and federal employees to question all orders from the White House. And I've even seen since over the last few weeks, some of these Democrat officials have implied that they are going to launch criminal investigations if a Democrat takes the White House in 2028 against federal employees and military personnel who do not question these illegal orders. I think the New York Times published an interview with multiple DOJ lawyers and officials over the weekend. One of them stood out to me, was a Washington, D.C. prosecutor who said that there are career officials who are cooperating. They use the word cooperating, I believe, with the Trump administration, but that he is effectively keeping a list of these people with the idea that when 2028 rolls or 2029 rolls around, and if there's a Democrat in the White House, they will be launching criminal investigations against people who cooperate, specifically federal employees who cooperate with the Trump administration. I think overall, the idea behind all these projects, including this one, is to politically neutralize at least the U.S. military and federal employees in the intelligence community so that they do not follow orders from the Trump administration to do some of the things they've talked about, like investigating far left affinity groups and the far left nonprofit networks.
Yeah. You know, so much of this stuff is just like indivisible. And you have these protest groups and they say, oh, we're protesting it's against fascism. And ostensibly, they are just protest groups. Ostensibly, this is a network of former JAG officers and other attorneys who are just ensuring that members of the military have options or have representation or have someone assisting them if they are going to defy illegal, unconstitutional orders. And on its face, that's what these organizations are. It's just a protest group. It's just a legal group. And the problem is, when both, and I have not seen the Orders Project cite this, but I have seen Indivisible cite this, the 6 pillars, and this goes back to Gene Sharp, and he's got these six pillars of society that basically you attack non-violently through non-violent, strategic, non-cooperation tactics. But the 6th pillar is getting the police and military to abandon the existing government, and this is what happens. Basically, have these 6 sectors of civil society, and the whole strategy of Color Revolution is to get them to walk away, to no longer provide their support, to either actively or passively oppose the sitting government. And what happens is when you have civil service and police and law enforcement and business and labor and all the 6 pillars, when you have them withdraw their support, if you think of these like the Parthenon or whatever, and if these pillars collapse, well, the whole thing collapses in on it. And so that's why they're trying to erode these pillars, is because these are the pillars on which any government stands when you erode the pillars, you cause the regime to collapse. Okay, this is the whole Gene Sharp color revolution stuff. And so when I see this, remember, this is ostensibly, it's just a legal organization to support members of the military, to get them, to enable them to resist illegal orders. No one can name an illegal order yet that's been issued. I guess there maybe have been claims about the strikes on these drug boats in Venezuela. At any rate, everyone should keep in the back of their mind, military and police is the sixth pillar of the color revolution. All right, with that, I think we do have one more item to get through, and that's the Homeland Ops brief. Go ahead, Robert.
So over the weekend, there was a report that came out from News Nation and The Hill saying that DHS sources claim that Customs and Border Protection is going to narrow their enforcement focus during these federal surges to only illegal aliens with criminal convictions. DHS has denied this. I think on one side, this is possibly the result of some of this CBP and ICE infighting that has been going on, because the Trump administration has already replaced some ICE officials with CBP officials, but is planning to replace basically every ICE field office commander with a Customs and Border Protection official. I think part of this media situation over the weekend was a result of some of that political infighting within the DHS. But every indicator I've seen other than this points to the Trump administration is planning to increase the operational tempo of these federal surges next year. And this includes what we covered last week with the Boeing 737s. Also, the TSA, the New York Times got a hold of some government documents showing that a previously unannounced program through the TSA is sharing passenger data with ICE to facilitate some of these immigration arrests. And this did, according to these documents, this started in March of this year. Also, there were some more protests in Louisiana around Baton Rouge in the capital area and in New Orleans over the weekend. According to organizers, a few hundred people showed up to the Baton Rouge protest, and they said explicitly that the intent was to show Hispanic communities in Louisiana and Baton Rouge that there is opposition to the federal surges. So in addition to the capacity building function of these protests, I think the goal here is also to demonstrate that they can organize mass movements against ICE. And they're also using these for mutual aid purposes. So they're taking in donations and supplies for illegal aliens who are currently hiding from the federal surge.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. And let's go ahead and get to some questions, because we do have a lot to go through here. We'll just quickly go through some of these. How long or how far can the U.S. go on the Venezuela front before China, Russia, Cuba gets physically involved? Well, I mean, physically involved, I guess you mean militarily involved. Jared, that's we talk about the tyranny of distance, the United States and Taiwan, and China and Russia face the exact same problems, the tyranny of distance to Venezuela. I see Venezuela as a losing position for them. I don't think either of them are ready or capable to step in and military prop up Venezuela. I don't think it will come to that. What say you? I think you may be muted there.
Sorry. I said, sorry, that was a leftover one from Friday, but I said the exact same thing. And then on top of that, they're not incentivized to do it because the only one oil dependent is China, and they can get it from Russia or Iran. So they can cover that.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's go ahead and move to some newer questions. So along with the dollar losing its buying power, what about the euro or, pound sterling? Well, the latest thing that I saw that was in last week's economic early warning, which goes out to members. By the way, it's another reason to become an early warning member over at forwardobserver.com. Head over to forwardobserver.com/trial and sign up. Oh, and I'll add some stuff onto this towards the end of the show. However, the buying power of the euro, everyone's betting. I think almost everyone is betting on the U.S. dollar against the euro and the pound, and it all comes down to economic production. You're going to have just persistently very weak economic growth throughout the Eurozone, as you've had. They have all these grand aspirations, and they're just not going to be able to meet them because of deindustrialization, and they cannot build the energy. They don't have enough electricity. They don't have the military. They don't have the defense industrial base that they need to be able to do this. So they can talk a lot about it, but they don't have it. And I think eventually you're just going to see investors saying the Eurozone is NATO countries even but let's just say specifically the euro and the British pound are going to be much riskier than the dollar, because we do see a lot of, I think we do see a lot of industry also pulling out of Europe and heading towards the Western Hemisphere, to the United States, or to the, I call it the Amerizone, or whatever you want to call it. All right, don't we have enough information to disable these other countries to the point that it's not an 8-front war? Jared, I guess the question here is, don't we have enough targets to strategically alter the balance of power? I'm not sure what this question is in regard to, if you can remember.
I don't remember that one coming in. I started, but I don't remember what item we were covering. As far as avoiding an 8-front war, I could talk to that. I think that's it. That is happening.
All right. It's avoiding an 8-front war, or we're getting into an 8-front war?
No, avoiding one. I do think that the U.S. has, for several years, been building up attempting to build up its allies, successfully in Asia, unsuccessfully in Europe, in order to avoid an 8-front war. And that's what we're seeing, even with the national security strategy. They talk about the same thing, and tackling all the issues ourselves in the Americas, because we're the power here. We have no ally to lean on.
Hey, Jared or Robert, as I'm answering these next couple questions, can you hop on X or Google it and try to find that map, that MS Paint map of the 3 spheres of influence, because I see it coming up a couple times in some of these future questions. All right, we'll go ahead and move on here. How do current pacts such as NATO, the Quad, et cetera, factor into this drawing of spheres of influence? Well, I mean, fundamentally, you have diplomatic alliances, you have an economic alliance, and you have a military alliance. And so, I think if the Trump administration goal is to enable Taiwan to resist, but potentially avoid starting a world war over Taiwan, then, I think the economic alliances are still extremely important. The supply chain alliances, so that's what this Pax Silica thing is, obviously incredibly important. I'd say maybe the military part of global NATO and the Quad maybe becomes a little less important for war fighting, not so out of deterrence. Jared, what say you?
I think you're about right. I do think the U.S. still wants to have influence over all of the other lesser spheres, though, such as Europe and the Asian Pacific. Basically, like you mentioned earlier, it's right sizing, but it's still doing so by elevating people to actually take the reins in their respective areas, so the U.S. can be a star player when needed, not the primary guarantor, or sole guarantor, rather.
Yeah. So we do see these European countries like France and the UK sending these carrier strike groups out into Asia Pacific, sailing through what is China's sphere of influence. And these freedom, the FONOPs, freedom of navigation operations. I wonder at what point there will be if there will ever need to be, Jared, what say you? If there will ever need to be some version of, not necessarily NATO, but maybe like the Quad for South America, because we do have Colombia, we have Argentina, both of them are major non-NATO allies. And I wonder at what point we're going to start building something, not necessarily the equivalent of like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, definitely not the same as NATO, probably not the same as the Quad. Do we even need some kind of semi-formal military alliance in the Western Hemisphere?
I do think so, actually. I think so quite a bit, particularly if we're going back. Trump wants a golden age. He wants, make America great again. If those are his missions, fine, understood. The way you do that is by securing the hemisphere. You have to build up the allies here. You can't allow the current hostile wave to be temporary. You cannot allow it. So build them up and then have them patrol their waters the same way that you would for Japan, for the Philippines, and train them in a way that they integrate well with the United States as, the heavy hitter. So particularly that's important for countries like Panama, Peru, Chile, Argentina, because they control key waterways, both in the canal and down at the tip.
All right. Great point. isn't China essentially trying to take over or encumber Brazil's agricultural sector? China's response to U.S. extended Monroe Doctrine. I think China is limited to their ability to counter the Monroe Doctrine. I think they have their hands full in the Asia Pacific region right now. One thing that China has been doing is since 2022, 23, maybe going back to 21, is shifting. Actually, no, this started before. This started back during the first Trump administration. China began shifting a bulk of their agricultural purchases away from the United States to Brazil. And that was one way, not only to get back at the Trump administration for the tariff war by punishing U.S. farmers, well, punishing the United States by ending a lot of their ag purchases, but also a way to prop up their BRICS partner in Brazil. So I see that more of as, I don't see that's necessarily Chinese response to the Monroe Doctrine, but I think that's basically what's going on. I don't think they're trying to take over necessarily Brazil's ag. I think they're just trying to buy from their friends and not buy from their adversaries, so much at least. Mike, if we observe a protest, is there a place on the website or in the new website to report observations? Yes, actually there is. There is a way that you can report that, and we will have, actually this week, I'm getting a demo link. And so we'll start, we've already been, it's basically already beta tested, but we just need to bring in some users, and we'll start testing this out. The future of early warning at Fort Observer is a real-time intelligence platform, not just for breaking news, but for deep analysis, insight, for outlooks, for actual intelligence. So this is not going to be like Telegram where you get a bunch of raw information and no one tells you what it means. You're going to get the raw data, you're going to get the news, you're going to get the information, and then you're going to get analysis, not only from us, but also from other users who have deep knowledge and deep experience in parts of these worlds. So it is a killer platform, we'll say. It's very good, and I'm looking forward to getting everyone on it later this month as a Christmas present. All right, Ben asks, or he says, was talking to a machine shop owner who sold his business. We need domestic manufacturing, but it's not competitive with global alternatives. Do you see any off-ramps for hegemonic decline and declining standard of living? No, and no. There's no way to avoid this. It's already happening. This ball has been rolling. It's not just during Trump. You could probably say this started in the wake of 9/11 and the U.S. response in Afghanistan and then in Iraq. So listen, all good things come to an end, and we are at the end of the life of Pax Americana as we know it. There will be hegemonic decline. We will be retreating back to the Western Hemisphere. Of course, we're still going to maintain the military presence in key parts of the world, but it's not going to be like it has been. And no, we're going to have continued declines in standard of living as well. And that goes back to not just our K-shaped economy, where the very wealthy people are doing very well, and the middle class and lower class are not doing real well. So in addition to this K-shaped economy we have, basically, if you look at the right half of a K, one part points up, the other points down, and that's basically what's happening in the economy right now. And the future of the dollar is just loss of value. It's going to continue to lose value. The government's going to have to run. This goes back to this great book called, I don't have it here, How Governments Go Broke. And Ray Dalio, who's a former hedge fund manager, says very plainly that the government's going to have to run high inflation, much higher inflation than we have been accustomed to in this country since the period of disinflation that started happening in the 80s or 90s. And I just get used to it. Your dollar is going to buy less and less in the future. And they have to do that because governments they're basically just, in addition to monetizing the debt, they're going to have to devalue the dollar so they can pay off the debt down to a sustainable level. So Ben, sorry, not in our lifetimes, brother. Just get used to it. I think, was it in don't quote me on this, but if I recall correctly, you look at the collapse of the British Empire, and I think it was over 30 years, the British pound lost 50% of its purchasing power. Probably, I would say this may not be a mirror image, but that's probably what we're looking at. North Korea has been noticeably quiet as of late. How do you think it will respond to overt Republic of Korea development of a nuclear program? All right, Jared, South Korea does let's say, go nuclear, they do host their own nuclear weapons or host American nuclear weapons in South Korea. Briefly, is that nuclear war?
I don't think it will get to nuclear war. The North can't really survive that. I think it'll just be constant tension. The main issue with South Korea is it may drive everybody else around them to push for nuclear weapons,
including Japan and who else?
Okay.
Japan and Japan and who else?
The Philippines, I think, would want one. They have not voiced it, but frankly, they need it. Yes,
nuclear Philippines is scary to me.
Yes, I don't think they can maintain it technologically. I think it would have to be they buy them, but that doesn't mean that they don't. If they ever feel insecure in the U.S.'s security guarantees, I think we'll start seeing them push for additional nuclear deterrence here. Taiwan, I think, is a big one. If I remember right, I want to say it was the 80s or 90s, they were seriously considering it, actually talking about developing it. I would not be shocked to find Australia pushing for it as well. They do have the technology to build one, to maintain one, and they are the uranium capital of the world. So it really just comes down to, do they get the enrichment technology transfer? And as one, particularly if South Korea wants to do it and other people find out, but they also want it, I think we could see illicit transfers of that technology. And it's tough to say, but
let's give all these countries nuclear weapons.
Well, that is a potential.
All right. Well, let's move on from that rabbit hole for now. All right. Is there any accurate information on how China's chip production for AI purposes is catching up to the West capabilities? I see many conflicting reports and opinions ranging from they are many years behind to they are catching up rapidly. First of all, I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive. But all I can do is I look at like David Sachs, who's the tech czar or the AI czar for the White House, and Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, has talked about this as well. Basically saying the United States does maintain an advantage in the AI race, but China is trying to catch up. And I don't think they're many years behind. I think they're probably a few years behind. Jared or Robert, have you seen anything different? And listen, anything differently? And listen, I don't know how much of this is cheerleading versus ground truth, but this is something that Trump officials are saying, Bessent and Sachs.
So I have not seen anything different. One thing to keep in mind is that China does fake a lot of its technological progress. A lot of the autonomous robots that you see published. If you catch a video from the same event but at a different angle, you'll actually sometimes find a guy controlling it remotely right next to it, and he's just not. You can't see the remote in the published angle. So I would be very careful to say, "Oh yeah, they're catching up. They are here." Take that with a grain of salt. China will fake things a lot.
Mm-hmm. I haven't seen anything differently.
Okay. All right. Yeah, maybe we can follow up on that. Because David Sachs, I mean, he occasionally talks about this stuff on the All In podcast. That's the last thing I saw that he said. What is the chance that the federal power plant bill gets passed with one of the major plants in Washington closing in a few weeks? Would the law have any effect on recently closed plants? Robert?
I think it has a decent chance of passing. There's been pretty much bipartisan feelings in DC that this is a problem. Of course, there's disagreement over how to actually fix it. Democratic Party generally wants to replace it with renewables. The Republicans have been talking about the baseload power generation issue. And this would affect state level. According to this bill, it would allow the FERC to reach down into the states and tell them that they have to do something about especially transmission projects. And the Federal Power Act already allows the Trump administration to do this, to send these notices to power plants to tell them not to shut off. I think the idea behind there's likely, I think, the Trump administration push behind this bill because they don't want to just have to rely on Chris Wright to write these Federal Power Act letters for the rest of the administration to do that, to keep doing this.
Mm-hmm. It's just nuts that so many regions of this country are experiencing power shortages to the point where they can't build. They can't even start construction on these projects because they're going to get them built, and they're going to be 2 years away from being hooked up to the power grid. And we still see power plants coming down predominantly in these blue states. It is suicidal. We'll have to leave it at that. But real quick, has Clean Power Plan 2.0 been repealed by the administration? Was that an executive order?
Yes.
From Obama, number 1, and then Biden. Okay, so I imagine that's long gone.
Yeah, I think that was one of the first things Trump did. The problem is that doesn't stop all these plants that we're already planning to close for economic reasons or otherwise. The actual policies that push that have been reversed.
Mm-hmm. Well, trying to allow Canada to act as an American ally. Well, I think the bigger question is, will Canada allow Canada to act as an American ally? I think that is certainly China does hold some influence, obviously, over Canada. I think everyone sees that. And there's no doubt elite capture happening in Canada, just like here in the United States and many other countries around the world. But Canada's got way bigger problems than Chinese influence in Canada. Certainly that exacerbates the problem, but really it's a problem of politicians, I think, in Canada. And we're going to go through the rest of these rapid fires, 3 more, and we'll jump off. I see posts from leftist action groups talking about info regarding ICE in Border Patrol, Border Protection, activity to coordinate direct action interventions. Is there value in anonymously sending in false location data to waste their time? Well, okay. Anything with intelligence is trash in, trash out. So a couple of points on this. What we're talking about are these like apps like ICE Watch, and there's like a handful of other websites that do this. I think wasn't ICE Watch removed from the App Store? One of the major ones was removed from the Apple App Store. All right. So yes, it's see something, say something. It enables volunteers they see an ICE agent getting coffee at Dunkin' Donuts or driving around in a vehicle, and they can basically send up a salute report, provide time, location for ICE, a picture, whatever. And then that gets pushed out to activists. And if there's an ongoing ICE operation, then they have these things called rapid response networks, which in theory enable these activists to identify this location and then mobilize, get out there, and then try to intervene. And this has been working in Portland, Chicago, New York. It was going on in Los Angeles, Charlotte, to a lesser extent now New Orleans and Louisiana. So these things are happening. In terms of disrupting this, a couple of things. I think they probably have learned to not rely on single source reporting. So this may be the case where a couple of things, and I'll just speaking as an intelligence analyst here. There's a couple problems with this. Okay. You're always going to deal with uncertainty when you have any kind of information coming in. There's uncertainty over accuracy. How accurate is this report? Uncertainty over completeness. Is there anything else to know about this report that was not reported? Timing. This person provided a spot report, but I don't know if this person reported this recently and they saw it 15 minutes ago or 15 hours ago. So an uncertainty over timeliness. So there's just a lot of questions that an analyst has to deal with. So one way that an analyst deals with questions like this is by looking at other reports. So if you have an area, let's just say there's an ICE operation, and every time there's a substantial ICE presence, you always get 3, 5, 6, 10 reports. So basically you have multiple reports coming in about a single operation from independent sources. Then that's going to lead an analyst to say, okay, well, this is more likely to be true than not. And so providing a single source report, maybe you have them try to confirm it and they can't confirm it, so they move on. So if you were going to do this, I would say do this in tandem with multiple separate accounts and have 3, 5, 10 people doing this with secure, obviously security caveats like your IP address or your account or whatever. Like you got to take security precautions. I mean, this is basically a counterintelligence operation here. So, and it's a lot more complex than we have time to go into now, but think about your digital footprint and any personally identifying information. Because the first thing, here's the problem. As an analyst, every report, every source, every human intelligence source has a source number. So I may not know who exactly that source is, but I've got a source number and I can go back and look at all this source reporting. And this guy's been reporting for 6 months and 90% of his reports have been assessed as being accurate. Okay. That's an A-rated source. Like that, whenever that source sends something, I'm going to pay close attention to it because it's more likely than not to be right. It's probably accurate. And source reporting history also goes the opposite way. When you have one account or one source number providing 10 or 20 different reports and they've all been baloney, then obviously I'm not even going to pay attention to this guy anymore because he's manufacturing information, he's just producing information. Or worse, it's part of some strategic deception campaign, in which case that's a counterintelligence issue and that source gets referred to someone else. So I would say those are some general considerations. I mean, just think about if you provide reports and they're all fake, they're going to ignore you and they're no longer going to look at that, or you'll just be blocked or whatever. So think about this from a strategic angle. Start with the objective in mind. What is your objective? I would say providing false information about real events may be more valuable than trying to generate smoke where there is no event. Like you say, oh, I saw an ICE agent here. And you know what? They're going to put that marker on a map and move on probably. That's my guess. But if you jump on to an existing ICE event where you know multiple people are probably reporting that ICE event, reporting observations from that ICE event, and then you say, oh, multiple squad cars are going down this way, then maybe you can get them to chase their tail over there and dedicate some resources to try and maybe track that down. So I would just say, think about it strategically, think about it critically, and maybe flooding the system with false reports. Maybe there is some value in that. I would just say, start with your objective. What do you want to cause? Like, what effect do you want to create through providing false information? Michael Jackson. Tee-hee. All right. Great question, by the way. All right, it was late today. Maybe you covered it, but saw where Valero is moving refining out of California at a loss of $1 billion. Do you have any information on the impact refined products in the United States? Robert, this is something that you've been covering for a long while. And this is something that Gavin Newsom basically supported. And then he realized, oh, this is actually bad for the state of California. And then he did this 180 and he's like, was trying to save these refineries in California after trying to shut them down or something to that effect. Briefly, what's going on with California?
Yeah, as far as I know, the latest was he's trying to reverse that. They're still planning on shutting down these 2 refineries next year. I haven't seen any update from Phillips 66 or Valero. As far as the impact, every other state around California said this is going to disrupt the Western fuel market for Western states. And as far as I can see, that's still on track.
Okay. Robert, if you can, please check the West. I forget what pad number it is, but can you check those pad numbers and just keep an eye on it over the next couple of months and see if there's any like potential shortages developing? I guess bottom line, prices are going up even higher in California, Robert. I mean, would you say that's accurate? Fuel prices up.
Yeah.
Up. All right.
I expect them to go up.
Okay. All right. Last question here, Mike. When you said the dollar would lose 50%, so listen, I didn't say the dollar would lose 50% of its value, and I almost hesitate to say that British statistic again of the British pound because I don't recall it exactly, but I think it was something like in the 30 years post collapse of the British Empire, the pound lost 50% of its purchasing power. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's what I remember reading. I read it many years ago. Do you mean 50% of the current dollar value, or are you thinking 50% of the value before it started to decline? Okay. So whenever you talk about something dropping, it is always in relation to something else. So, typically when we're talking about the value of the dollar dropping, you look at the DXY index that is as measured against a value measured against the value of a basket of other currencies. So the dollar is declining in relation to other currencies. So if you look at the dollar declining priced in gold, well, the dollar's declined 50% as measured in gold because gold has doubled in the past, 2 years or something like that. So roughly 2,000 to 4,000, somewhere around there. And so it depends what you're pricing those dollars in. So I don't know what I don't have an estimate in terms of how much value the dollar is going to lose. I just know, what is it? What's the statistic? The dollar's lost 97 or maybe up to 99% of its value since 1913, a little over 100 years ago. I would just say your purchasing power, I would say conservatively. Well, listen, I'm not an economist and I don't know. I would just give you my thoughts off the top of my head. I could be way off base. I would say pretty much plan for about 5 to 10% of your purchasing power to disappear year over year. So basically in Yeah, we'll leave it there for now. You know what? I'm going to try to wrangle Michael Every back, and maybe we'll talk about this in greater detail from someone who actually knows, or at least has a really good idea. Everyone, thanks so much for joining us here. That's going to do it for this daily sit rep from the early warning team here at Ford Observer. We appreciate your support. Head over to fordobserver.com/trial. Here in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to have our new early warning intelligence and news platform up. We'd love to have you join us. It's network effect. The more people we have on this platform, the more people sharing information, sharing ideas, sharing how they see things going on, the better it is for everyone, because that's what intelligence analysis is. So we're basically crowdsourcing our intelligence. So it's not just a handful of people providing information. It's having the benefit of the entire network. We're up over 4,000 members now, and there's going to be a big push to get people to not only pay attention to what's going on at the national strategic level, kind of big picture, long-term strategic level, but also on the tactical level, what's happening in your city, in your county, in your state. And that way we're plugged in to the tactical, operational, and strategic levels. And we have a much better picture of how these national level events are going to affect you at the local level, out your front door, down your driveway, down your street, in around your neighborhood and community. And with that, we appreciate your support. And with that, we will be back in your inbox tomorrow morning, back on the show starting at 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.